Well, good evening, or whatever the case may be. It's 9:15 p.m. here, so we're coming up on the midnight hour, as they say. Who says that? I have no idea. At any rate, my name is Gabriel Ricard. I am a writer. I've been one for almost 20 years at this point. About 20 years at this point. I write columns for Cultured Vultures and Drunk Monkeys. Feel free to check out Captain Canada's Movie Rodeo or Make the Case. I write for other publications when I can, and along the way I've gotten a couple of books out. I had a novel come out this year from Moran Press, and I've got readings, lined up this summer for Portland, and I'm trying to do a few more readings on Long Island, but I'm lazy, unfortunately. It's a really attractive trait in an artist, but I'm not so lazy that I can't gather everybody around and read a couple of chapters from Bondage Night, which is available now from Moran Press, along with a number of many other fine books. And if you're digging the cover, that was brought to you by somebody named Joan Comics. You can find her on Facebook. She does a webcomic series that is quite brilliant called PhD Unknown. And I believe she has a Patreon for that as well. So throw her some money if you like this cover. Because for me, I don't think there was any greater moment in the long publication history of this novel, because this was originally a short story that I wrote about 6 or 7 years ago, and then it became a novella, and then it was expanded a little bit bigger, and then it was changed around. It's gone through a lot, thanks to people like Frankie Met and Stephen Moran of Moran Press. And so yep, there's one of those tangents that they talk so much about. Golly gee, the point of this is that throughout the long, difficult publication history and editing process of this book, probably the greatest joy, even greater perhaps than the day the book came out, was seeing this cover for the first time, because Joan had initially read a very, very, very early draft and based her art exactly on that, and she didn't have a lot to work with, and she just turned out something extraordinary. There's really no changes were ever made to this beyond the first version. This is the first and only version of the cover that we ever ran with, and it's amazing to have a book and my name on something this good. So, Joan Comics, once again. But since I've got you here anyway, I thought, why not read a couple of chapters? We're going to jump around a little bit. I guess a summary would probably be a good idea. The back of the book, man, it's always the way to go. Bondage Night chronicles the vicious climax of a chaotic, intense, compulsion-driven love affair between two unhappy, delusional people. Gabriel Ricard's debut novel shows what brought them together in the first place. Then comes the surreal, exhausted aftermath. Through it all, the protagonists persevere, but by the time it finally ends, Leo and Laura may never be the same. It's pretty good. That about sums it up. So we're going to jump right in here. We've got chapter 1, and then if we got a little time, we'll jump in and read chapter 11. By 11, it was Leo's turn to try out the cross. He had it all worked out in his head, the whole walk over to the little stage, the stripper, and the cross itself. This was a comedy. This whole thing was going to be really goddamn funny in either a week or 6 months. That part was going to depend entirely on what Laura thought tomorrow. She had given him her blessing, but that blessing could just as easily disappear later. 2 hours from now, she could change her whole mood and decide she'd never agreed to it in the first place. He looked around the bar for her, no idea of where she had run off to. It was only a half hour to go that they had been sitting together, but he couldn't remember where in the bar that had been. The whiskey sours were legion, and they had replaced his short-term memory nicely. He tried to pinpoint the moment when everything around him had gone from the calm before the storm to the actual storm of human activity. This was designed to be one of the city's trendier college bars, very carefully designed to look like a derelict hole in the wall. Bondage Night was just one of their many little functions. Bars were just a profound waste of time and money for him. It was cheaper to get drunk at home, and the music was better. As he finished his drinking and got up, he looked around for Laura again. There was a lot going on outside, and his eyes were having a hard enough time focusing on the room. This wasn't drunk. Not yet. Not even close. But it was right in the middle of knowing that he was going to be fairly hammered by the time he finally settled the tab. The human obstacle course from the bar to the little stage was considerable. He had to struggle to be aware of the $7 wells, $4 beers, and how much he was spending on them. Moving freely was out of the question. Every step felt and probably looked like a crazed acid dance. He rested against the back of a chair for a moment, or against the point of being 5 surprisingly strong drinks into the evening. The night was going to move on with or without him. It seemed important to move along with it. The song playing was pretty good. Offhand, he was pretty sure he hadn't heard the Sister of Mercy in about 6 years. Of course, the next song would probably be one of the 5 Nine Inch Nails songs he didn't really care for. He gave a feeble wave when he was close enough to the little stage to be seen by the stripper, or he thought she was a stripper. He wasn't actually sure. Bondage Night seemed a little too silly as an actual concept to attract an actual dominatrix. He didn't want to ask her. He couldn't even remember her name. She had told him earlier. It was a plain name. He remembered that much. Thankfully, she seemed to remember him, and said something he couldn't hear over the music. There was no choice but to guess. Yeah, he said, I'm ready whenever. She pointed at something. It took him a second to realize she was talking about his jacket. When he and Laura first decided to go to this thing, he'd spent a good hour, with Laura taking 3, trying to figure out what would look like a legitimate effort to fit in. Even though it was August, the leather jacket seemed like the only way to go. He was hoping for a cool enough evening and was grateful to be getting one. Once people had started to really pack in the place, it felt a bit warmer, but he was willing to put up with it. He took his jacket off, handing it to the other dancer. He liked the Louise Brooks as an 80s drug addict quality of the one working the cross, the one he had actually been speaking to, but they were both sexy in an out-of-his-league kind of way. Then again, so was Laura. The virtually non-existent bondage outfits they wore were only reminding him of the old buoyant days, when he could think about these things without the constant companion of paranoia. Laura wasn't a psychic, but she could probably play one on TV. The stripper's sweat clung to her skin. It was choked, beyond disconcerting sexuality. It actually looked like it was tightening her skin. Her black bangs were matted against her forehead. She pointed at his shirt and said something else he couldn't hear. Most likely she was telling him to lose it. That was fine. It made sense. He wasn't really looking forward to showing off how much weight he had gained in the last few months. He handed the shirt over and killed the introspection. That was one of the constant dangers inherent with drinking. Everything had to be analyzed to death, reanimated and then questioned again at great length, starting with why it needed to be discussed into oblivion in the first place. If you'll allow me. His experience with S&M was just barely diverse enough to pass an evening with the stories he had accumulated. However, he'd never tried any one of these bondage cross things. It was just assumed where his legs and arms were supposed to go. The cross itself was metal. It looked shiny and well cared for. There was an adrenal charge from how chilled it felt against his skin. It was almost impossible to see anything from the right. The world could only be viewed from the left. Still, he looked around for Laura as the stripper tied him down and then leaned into his ear, fastening the last arm strap. How much can you take? That had been one of the questions barreling around in his mind when he'd signed up. Coming up with an answer required going through all the aforementioned stories. Some of them were actually quite fun to reminisce on. Others were a little too much like a Warren Zevon song that forgot who Warren was during his giddy days. There were other stories and memories that indicated an ability to take a good beating, so he told her to do whatever she wanted. Why was she automatically a stripper? He wasn't sure why he had made the assumption, probably the way she was dancing with the other girl earlier. She nodded, her breath warmer than the rest of the bar. He had no choice but to feel guilty for enjoying even a second of it. Laura had a line of credit with guilt that could punch a hole in the sky. His thoughts seized and then lost their breath when the soft leather flogger began caressing the wet skin on his back. Besides the cross, it was the coolest to the touch thing in the room, feeling wonderful in its leather-to-flesh tap dance, all kinds of heavy doses. He knew where this was going, though. With a good feeling of tension primarily focusing itself on the neck, he waited patiently for the muscles to lock when she took things a step further. Looking up from the cross, Leo thought he could see Laura standing in the middle of the bar throng. The dark hair that stopped at the shoulders didn't look a thing like Audrey Hepburn's, in spite of what she liked to claim. And the black dress that effortlessly complemented her assortment of curves certainly suggested it was she. It was hard to get a good look at the face, though. The cat o' nine tails came down in varying degrees of strength. Each lash was unique and heralded a moment to freeze time and enjoy the sensation. At least that's what he assumed beforehand. It didn't quite work out like that, but it went on for a number of rounds as he continued to scan the crowd for Laura. Hopefully she wasn't taking pictures. He didn't trust his face, what it might do when the tails of the flogger made their impact. Each lash left little to no time to register, each one on its own terms. They just moved together, working towards a singular symphony of intensity. Then it abruptly stopped. She leaned into his ear again and asked if he was all right. He replied in the positive. She left again, and now there was nothing but burning skin, a whole plateau of heat and humidity in his throat. With a little luck, Laura would be having a good time, too. She needed that even more than he did, especially after what the last few weeks had put her through. So that was chapter 1. We're 11 minutes in. That's probably a bit long. So God knows this thing's going to have to be edited for time or made again. But yeah, one more time. The book is Bondage Night by Gabriel Ricard. I'm a dummy. Moran Press. They have a number of fine books. Please check them out. And hey, enjoy your evening.